my friends, I am thrilled to be here, ridiculously excited. I love being able to speak with people and be able to kind of maybe challenge your thinking a little bit. It's one of my favorite things to do. Those of you in the back, are you okay without the microphone, or do you want me to use it? And you can just be totally honest. Can you guys in the back hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. If you cannot at any time, please let me know. I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to be here, be able to participate. So again, I'm Rebecca Martinez. I'm a Paz therapist, or a Paz Wellness therapist. I get to work with Dr. West at Paz and Fast Forward Charter High School. And I also work at Family Counseling in Logan. So this is the typical lovely picture you usually see. This is my cute family. I have 5 boys. My husband, who's up here. This is how it really goes at our house, though. So this might be a little more relatable. And then I have to finally, at the end of the day, go, oh dear, that is my circus, and those are my monkeys. So, that's us. Okay. Tough emotions are part of our contract with life. You don't get to have a meaningful career, raise a family, or leave the world a better place without stress and discomfort. Discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. I am participatory, by the way, so if you were hoping to come back and sit and not participate, I would encourage you to do otherwise. All right, so I want to know, any thoughts on this? It's supposed to be easy life, right? This is how it's supposed to go. Okay, so we're talking about faith development. This is what we call a wellness wheel. And so there are multiple different areas of wellness that we look at when we're talking to people in a therapy setting. And there's usually what we call a presenting problem, and then we can go through any or all of these different areas to figure out kind of what's going on with them. Spirituality is one that's very interesting because a lot of people, especially in Utah and in Cache Valley, get really nervous when you say spirituality. So I'll define it a little bit more later on in my presentation, but what we're talking about is how do you make meaning out of life? Okay, it's different than organized religion. Spirituality is how do you make meaning out of life? And what research tells us is that as individuals are more clear on how they make meaning out of life and how they deal with the difficult things that are happening to them, that they have better mental health. So typically that involves some kind of a higher power. It involves grounding practices. There's a lot of things that are typically involved, but that's kind of just to give you a little bit of context. I want to tell you just a little bit about how I came across this topic, and I had the chance, dang it, you guys, I'm not supposed to cry. I had the chance to have a bonus daughter, and she came into my life. My sister's so cute. She just hooks me up here. She came to my life about 8 or 9 years ago. She was 14, lots of trauma, and she started calling me mom, and just was at my house all the time. We couldn't get rid of her, huh, sweetie? Like, she was there all the time. We're like, go home. She didn't want to go home because it was a hard place. So we kind of adopted her, not officially, not legally, but kind of became her unofficial parents. And she started going to our church with us and decided she wanted to be very involved. And then she decided to go on a mission for our church. She came back. She decided she wanted nothing to do with it, and that she decided that she has a lot of different life goals and just hated God, didn't believe in God. And I was like kind of confused. And then as I'm doing therapy with people, I'm meeting with young adults and teenagers who are Jehovah's Witnesses, who are Baptists, who are Methodists, who are doing the same thing. And they're totally stepping away from everything that they grew up with and want nothing to do with it. And it was really weird to me and pretty distressing. And so I was trying to figure out how to make meaning out of it, right? So, show of hands, any therapists in the room? Couple therapists, parents, anybody parents? How about religious or spiritual or church leaders? Okay, anybody not raise their hand? Like, what? Lydia, you are just loved. We just love you anyways. Yeah, you're right. You're not a parent yet, but we'll get there. Okay, or not. I don't know. But okay, so yeah, Lydia, thank you. Hopefully you guys go hear Lydia later. She's amazing. She's one of our speakers. So I started researching this, and I came across all of these theories and models of faith development. So as a therapist, I take classes in psychology. I learn about human development. I learned that I don't expect a 2-year-old to be doing the same things developmentally as a 6-year-old. I learned that I don't expect an 8-year-old to be doing the same things developmentally and cognitively as an 18-year-old. And I don't get mad at my 3-year-old when they're doing the things that are appropriate for their developmental stage. I just know that it's part of their development. Well, the same thing exists with faith development, but not everybody knows about it. So one of my goals is to take some of the fear out of the journey for yourselves and your loved ones and help you understand that when people have questions, when people have doubts, when people do things that you don't understand, there's a very, very high probability that it's normal, and it's part of very normal faith development that has been researched, and there's tons on it. So the particular model that I'm using is one that is not everybody's favorites. There's a lot of controversy about it. I'm using it nonetheless as a base, and then I'll also give you a couple of other models to look at. There are pieces that I'm going to fly through because they are more geared towards therapists. And so those of you that are therapists, I am happy to share my slides. You guys can have all the resources you want. But what I'm hoping is that the information will allow you to connect with some people that maybe you've previously had some fear or some anger or whatever in connecting to, and be able to have a conversation. Okay. So objectives, we have to have these for our credentialing. So this is kind of what we'll be going through a little bit. And we're going to be using James Fowler's Stages of Faith. I have just a couple of statistics up here I'll go through just very briefly. So whenever I attend a presentation or a class, I want to know what's in it for me. Why do I care? Why do I want to even stay in this room? And so for this particular presentation, Pew Research tells us that there are 28, so it went down a little bit, but there are 28% of US adults who are now religiously unaffiliated. So it means 28% of individuals that they surveyed said, I do not identify with any specific religion, okay? Of those 28%, 17% said they're atheists, 20% said they're agnostic, and then 63% of that 28% said nothing in particular, which means they don't deny some kind of a higher power. So chances are, as you're working with people, whether it's in your work, in your religious context, as a parent, your kids, those that you work with, are going to be interacting with a lot of people with a lot of different beliefs. This is just therapists. Sorry, we're going to fly through. This is DSM. There are some spiritual stressors in there. And again, I'm happy to share my slides. So I just want to go through this. This is the mumbo jumbo, but I'll give you an example to solidify it. So here are the stages as defined by James Fowler in a book that he wrote called Stages of Faith. And stage 0 is just primal faith. So it's infancy, it's pre-language. An example, baby Emma is 10 months old. She's forming her earliest trust based on her interactions with her caregivers. She experiences comfort and security when her parents respond to her needs for food, warmth, and affection. These early experiences of trust and security lay the foundation for how she will later relate to the world, others, and the divine, okay? Stage 1 is intuitive projective faith. So an example of that, and you guys, it's really tiny, but I have, for anybody interested, they're paired up with Erickson's stages of faith for anybody that's, or stages of development for anybody that's interested in those. Intuitive projective, this is early childhood, so toddler, 4 or 5 years old. Case example, 4-year-old Ethan loves going to church. So hopefully you're seeing people in your lives in these different examples, and you can kind of identify what it looks like. 4-year-old Ethan loves going to church with his family. He's fascinated by the bright colors of the stained glass windows and the stories of Jesus. When he prays at night, he talks to God like a magical figure who can solve all of his problems. Ethan's understanding of God is shaped by his vivid imagination and the stories his parents tell him. He sees God in concrete, almost fantasy-like terms, similar to his understanding of fairy tales. Stage 2 is mythic literal faith, so childhood. 9-year-old Sarah attends Sunday school every week and has began to take religious stories very literally. When she hears the story of Noah's Ark, she asks very detailed questions about how exactly all of those animals could fit on the boat. And she believes the story exactly as it's told. She thinks that if you are good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. And there's nothing in between. Sarah's faith is centered on following the rules and understanding religious stories in concrete, literal terms. You're hearing some things that sound like people that you know or people that you have previously known. Stage 3 is synthetic conventional faith. Historically, this is the adolescent time period. 15-year-old Jason is very active in his church youth group and finds a strong sense of belonging there. His faith is shaped by the values of his family, friends, and church community. He identifies as a Christian because of what his family believes, and he feels accepted within this social group. Jason does not yet critically examine his beliefs, but accepts them because they are part of his social environment. His faith is based on conformity and fitting into his religious community. Historically, a lot of people stay in this stage. Okay, the study was originally done in the 80s. It was republished in 2007, and then there have been multiple other studies published since then and other models of faith. But historically, a lot of people just kind of stay here, and they're very happy to be there, and there's nothing wrong with that. Enter our day and age of the internet and of information sharing back and forth. And now we have people who previously were entering this stage in adolescence and then maybe staying there for even the rest of their lives, going through this stage in very early preteens, and just kind of the stages are all happening a lot quicker. And the thing that's interesting about this, and you'll see it visually in a little bit, I'm a very visual person. The thing that's happening with this is what it's creating is it's making it so that instead of people being able to go through each stage fully, they're kind of skipping through, and there's holes and gaps. And so it creates problems later on because there's no foundation. So from a human development standpoint, we want individuals to go fully through each stage of development. You learn how to crawl. You learn how to sit up, right? You learn how to crawl. You learn how to walk. You learn how to run. But when our day and age makes it so that you're kind of jumping around through the stages because of whatever you're seeing on social media, whatever's happening with your friends. So we have people communicating with teenagers who are experiencing way different things in other parts of the world. I have high school kids that I do therapy with who are trying to help people they've never even met through suicide crises, and their whole world is totally changed. It's causing some interesting effects. Stage 4, individuative reflective faith. Historically and adulthood, a person will critically examine their faith and it becomes more personal and self-chosen. So an example of this one, at age 22, Emily begins to question many of the religious beliefs she grew up with after going to college and encountering different perspectives. She starts to reflect critically on her faith. She reads books on philosophy and other religious traditions and feels the need to figure out what she truly believes apart from her family's expectations. Emily is struggling to reconcile her childhood beliefs with her personal experiences and is beginning to take responsibility for her own faith. She now seeks a deeper, more personalized understanding of spirituality. And again, this is happening a lot more quickly where we're moving into this. Wait a second. What I learned and everything that I've known isn't fitting with what I thought I knew in my interactions with others. And you could say that's what happened to me when I had this experience with my bonus daughter and in therapy. I'm like, well, my faith and my beliefs and my religion are very positive for the most part for me. And the things that I'm hearing and the really, really hard stories that people are telling me that they're experiencing in what I identify to be my religion doesn't make sense. How do I make sense of this? And so people start to question and they go, wait a second. And then they start to kind of dive a little bit deeper. What's interesting is when people are in this stage, they often look very negatively at the people in the prior stage, in stage 3, and vice versa. The people in the stage 3 often look very negatively on stage 4 people. And it's a very interesting dynamic oftentimes. What's interesting though is that to get to the next stage, and the next stage where you have a little more harmony, you have to go through this stage, but it doesn't look the same for everybody, right? It looks very, very different. Everybody has their own journey. Stage 5 is the conjunctive faith, again, historically midlife. At age 45, David has reached a stage where he embraces the complexity of faith. He acknowledges that not all religious questions have clear answers and is comfortable with the ambiguity and the paradox. And the ambiguity and the paradox is what causes distress in those previous stages. And you guys, I'm happy to share slides, you guys, with anybody, just so you know. So if you guys want, I'm happy to share these so you guys don't have to worry about capturing everything. David no longer sees the world in black and white. He recognizes interconnectedness of all religious traditions. He practices his faith through service and contemplation, accepting that there are many parts of the divine, and it is actually bigger and deeper and broader than what he previously thought and how he previously defined divinity. His faith is about embracing mystery and multiple perspectives and understanding others. And then this last one, stage 6, universalizing faith. This is historically a rare stage, so Mother Teresa would be in this stage, C.S. Lewis, there are some Gandhi. At age 70, Mary has reached a stage of profound spiritual wisdom. She has spent her life advocating for social justice and peace, motivated by a deep sense of universal compassion. She no longer sees faith as tied to any particular doctrine or tradition, and instead her life is centered on unconditional love and serving humanity. She sees all people as interconnected and seeks to live out her faith by caring for the marginalized and working for global justice. Her faith transcends her individual needs and is focused on selfless service to the world. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second. Any ahas or takeaways, or does anybody have any light bulbs that are currently going on in their brain?
Just a quick clarification on stage 6. You threw in C.S. Lewis's name. I would not put C.S. Lewis in stage 6
Okay.
at all. So
thanks for throwing that out.
Okay.
Fair enough.
I know you've mentioned Gandhi and Mother Teresa, so was that kind of off the cuff, or do you actually think that he was in that position? Or?
I'll tell you that was just another research I found. How about that?
Okay.
Big influence.
Yeah, so, but thank you for that. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
If this follows like development, if you miss a state, say those of us that were raised in a home where faith was absent, it makes sense why as adulthood, I mean, you have to go through the stage. So it makes sense.
It
What
puts
you're-
things in
what you're saying.
perspective.
I had a question that you mentioned that it's not necessarily tied to any specific religious doctrine. Thinking about Gandhi and Mother Teresa, though, I think their universal understanding of and care for others was deeply tied to their specific understandings and belief.
Yeah,
I think it's more, it's not that it can't be profoundly connected to their religious understandings and even their doctrine, but it's outward facing.
Yeah.
That it's not limited by service to that organization, but goes well beyond that.
for sure. And I'm glad you said that, and we'll get into that a little bit later too. That's perfect. Yes, absolutely, I agree.
Do you really think it's a rare stage, or do you think we only know about certain people? Because I think I see people in other parts of my life who are doing those same kinds of things, but of course not at that level.
This is James Fowler's writings right here. So this is based on his research. I personally don't think it's a rare stage. I think it's actually becoming more, just like have other people moving through the stages more quickly. I think we're actually finding this to be much less rare, and I think it's much more common.
I think it also it might seem more rare, especially when Fowler wrote this, because this is an old book. This is not new information, but because those that are going through other stages of faith are a little bit more vocal because of the justice factor, and you know what I mean? And I think when they get to that universalizing space, there's not the same need to be they themselves or their higher power or whatever is quote unquote justifying where they're at. So they don't need that external validation in the same way. So maybe it's just not as commonly heard.
Yeah, I like that. Absolutely. Those are great comments. Danny.
Going back to one of your very first slides, you put up the quote about discomfort being pricing mission in meaningful life. And I think that some people like the thought of floating through life and like, oh, it would be so easy for me to not have to put in a lot of work. It'd be great if that were the case. And that's where it kind of stops in one of the prior stages, stage 3, I think it was. Conformity, like, yeah, this is good, I'm just gonna float and coast through this. But where more and more people are getting through there and seeking more meaningful life, they're leaning into a little of that discomfort, but there's gotta be more, there's gotta be more. And so I agree that there are more people now that are getting further than those stages, and we're seeing more of that because more people are searching for education.
Sure.
Yes, I was just curious, are we teaching that then, as far as, it's because when my son was 22, all of a sudden he wanted to throw everything out. And you're thinking, but if it's a developmental stage, then it's one that he can, we don't, as a parent, fear. This is a process, hopefully he'll make the right choices in this as he's going through this. But is it possible to teach them that they can go through this without throwing everything out and being so judgmental about how they were raised? There's that.
It is, but also I think you have to trust. So here's what I'll say. You have to trust the process, but also you have to trust that God's in charge. I mean, quite frankly. And we'll talk about that a little bit too, but I'm one of those people that has to learn by experience. I can't just, my husband would love it if I was just, sorry, if I would just listen to people, right? But no, I just have to experience things. And so I was one of those people who in my early 20s, I was very, very angry, bitter, in a very dark place. I had to go through that because that was my journey. And if I hadn't gone through that, I couldn't get to the next stages. There are other people who can do it on a much more subtle level. And there's a contrast. I'll give you a quick example. When I was 14, almost 15, my best friend died. For me, that was the end of my faith. because I had used my faith so much she had cancer. And so in my developmental brain, she's going to doctors, she's getting treatment, she gets better, right? When she didn't, I was like, wait a second. That's not how the stories go, right? That's not what we read about. You pray and God answers prayers, right? It's that magical, mystical thing, right?
Didn't happen for me. And it stunk.
But hopefully you had somebody to talk to or not? Did-
Yeah, this brother right here.
Oh,
My older sister. But I have other people that I've met in my journey as a therapist who have the same thing happen, and they have the opposite effect. They lean into their faith, even if it doesn't go the way that it's supposed to in their brain. And so just understand, everybody has to have their own journey. And it's not our place to be able to say what that looks like. And I'll kind of, there's actually a slide that speaks to that later too, Jamie.
I was gonna say that in my experience, it completely depends on not just how you're taught as you grow up, but your personal experiences. So for example, my dad was brought up LDS, so that was always just the way the life was. That was, what he believed in because that's what his family believed in and everything like that. Whereas my mother didn't convert until she met my dad. And so she grew up thinking Sunday was just any other day, and that, religion wasn't a big part of her life. So in the beginning, me growing up, that's how it was. We were LDS. That's what we learned. That's what we believed. She had a much stronger faith, in my opinion, when I was younger than my father, because it was something she chose for herself, as opposed to what was ingrained into her as she grew up. Whereas for me personally, my childhood being the way it was, I leaned into that because that was my safe space. That was what helped me to feel like I could survive what I was going through, as opposed to, anybody else who may not have a struggle in their childhood. It would be completely dependent on those particular experiences that they went through that influenced the path they take. So as we get older, if it was something we chose for ourselves, we're less likely to be rebellious against it, as opposed to something that our parents and everybody else told us is how it should be.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jamie. Let me just, go ahead.
Just real quick, I think particularly as a local pastor in the evangelical community, helping people get to stage 4 and moving on beyond stage 3 is a really helpful but scary process.
Very scary.
And you don't need to help them sometimes. They're exploring it, particularly our younger generation, our millennials and our Gen Zers in record numbers. One of the greatest encouragement I see from the research is that while the none category, the none of the above affiliation, is probably the most rapidly growing category of religious faith in our culture, it's also the most fluid. The people that embrace a none kind of category for a season are oftentimes people who either come back to their faith of their childhood or explore other options of faith, but they do return to a kind of faith in a very positive way. So I think it's who, for us as parents, maybe sometimes, or adults that are struggling with our younger generation, struggling and waffling and going out into different places of the world, we could operate in the spirit of prayer and love, asking, hoping that they will return, but always being there for them, because that's going to probably be the single greatest way in which they can return to a place of faith. So I'm really encouraged. While I'm discouraged at times, I'm encouraged that more will come back in time.
Well, and the other thing about that is it can be a really scary place. And that's why I love this research, because what it says is that as you go through this, it's like going through a really deep river, right? Mm-hmm. As you're going through it, it gets really, really, really uncomfortable, but you have to go through that deep, uncomfortable part to come up on the other side where it's really beautiful. And it can be scary to watch people do that, right? Especially when we're on the other side going like, hey, it's really awesome over here. You don't have to struggle. They do. They have to go through that sometimes to get to the other side. Here are some other great comments. You guys, thank you so much. Here are some other models and theories of faith development. This is not comprehensive. There are more. So just understand this is such a huge area that you can get lost in as much or as little as you want. I love this. Okay. All right. So here's a little bit of a little bit of definition for you. So spirituality and religion, two separate entities, right? However, they can work together. So religion can enhance spirituality. It also can hinder it, depending on your experiences. Faith, the definition that I'm using in this presentation is always relational. Okay, so faith is relationship based. It's faith related to another person or being. So just an understanding that spirituality and religion are separate and distinct, but they can interact beautifully. They also can hinder each other. So just, again, depending on individual experiences, okay? I'm not going to read all of this, but just, again, happy to share slides. There's so much history. If you go back and look at just the history of words of belief, faith, some of the translations of the Bible when it was first coming through the times, and just what words meant is so interesting, and it gives a whole different spin on all of this. I'm not going to go into it, but again, just a little tip of something you can dive into if you're like I am. Why do we care about this information? So one of the things that we do at Paz is we present information like this to faith leaders, to parents, because as a therapist, I can work with students all day long. I can work with teenagers and young adults all day long. But the best way to be able to really help people in our community is to be able to give this information to parents, to faith leaders, to people in schools, to people who are at the front lines. When somebody is having a hard time. Okay. I also want to give you another thing to think about. Faith crisis is a huge word. Crisis is subjective. What's a crisis for one person is not a crisis for another. So I want you to take a step back and just understand that when somebody has questions, when somebody's exploring their beliefs, maybe it's just their journey, okay? And it's not something that we have to be afraid of. A crisis is somebody's in very severe danger, we need to call 911, right? I always tell people when I was the I was the lead social worker in some of the medical buildings when we lived in Phoenix, and they would call me all the time and say, we have a crisis. And I'm like, a crisis means you call the doctor, not the social worker, right? Like this is kind of how it goes. So a crisis is very interesting to think about, and it's based on your history. So just again, I just want to give you a thought of maybe it's not a crisis, maybe it's just somebody's journey, okay? Okay, I am going to play this video, and hopefully our sound works here.
And so I thought, well, I need some answers from heaven. So I started praying like I've never prayed before. How do I help my son get through this? How do I hold my family together? I just begged God to talk to me. It was the first time in my life that I felt like heaven was shut. It's shut. I couldn't get past the ceiling. I thought, well, this is a little challenge. That for a week or two, or a month or two. But 2 years, and you start asking yourself, wait a minute. Not just church stuff or policy stuff, but the issue is there really a God who hears my prayers? Does he know me? And is there something that I may have done that offended him so he won't talk to me? I mean, this is the stuff that really matters. Will I keep the promises when my heart feels nothing? We make all of our great promises in life when we're feeling great. When we fall in love, oh, I feel so great, I love you, I love you. When we feel the Spirit, oh, baptize me, I'm going to live righteously. What do we do when we feel nothing? And we fear that maybe nothing's coming. Well, that's where it was. So I got on my knees, and I prayed before a lot, and I'd had prayers I believed were answered, but it had been so long. And I said, I don't know if you're hearing this. I'm going to quit whining and moaning about this. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust that there's a reason that I can't feel your presence. There's a reason that I feel so abandoned. I'm going to trust that you're smarter than I am, that you get this better than I do, and at some point, and I don't feel like it'll ever happen, but at some point, you'll communicate with me, and I'll feel your love, and I won't feel so lost. I haven't given up hope, but I've given up trying to make myself feel something, or to say, what's wrong with me?
Okay, so it's easy, we would say, to believe things when you feel something, right? But what happens when you have a mental illness and you have these impacts on your spirituality? What happens when you're checking all the boxes, you're doing all the things, but you don't feel anything? So just food for thought. This is one of the slides we use in one of our presentations. Depression, anxiety, mental illness impacts the way that we experience life. It impacts the way that we have our relationships, which includes our relationship with higher power. What can cause a crisis of faith or someone to move forward in their faith journey? So a lot of the time this happens when people have some kind of a loss, a letdown, a life transition, mental or physical illness, relationship troubles or disasters. These are the times when people start questioning and wondering, what do they really believe? What is the meaning of this? Does it make sense? Can it fit in this box that I'm in? Or do I need to go to a different box, so to speak? This is a quote by his name is Stephen Lund, and I want to read this because this was something that was really instrumental in helping me understand. And it may not be impactful for anybody else, but this is something that really hit me. Let's talk about faith. Faith and belief are complicated things, right? They're easy words, but very complicated things. My recent work has made me especially attuned to youth whose gospel moorings sometimes fray. And it's not only young people, but many among us who find ourselves sometimes unsure of the doctrine or the narrative. We cannot judge each other for what we do and do not know. Belief and testimony come only through gifts of the Spirit, and gifts of the Spirit are, after all, gifts. They are highly individualized and measurably dispensed by a Heavenly Father who knows our hearts and needs and administers to them with divine precision. Heavenly Father purposely designed and ordered our world to require us to walk in faith. He pressed into place the pieces of this sophisticated jigsaw puzzle of mortality, but held back a few of the pieces which he keeps in his pocket to ensure that faith is required as we come up against the gaps in this puzzle's spiritual landscape. He has ensured that we will not be able to game the system by thinking our way to heaven, to discover him through provable math or science, which would obviate faith and foreclose the purpose of mortality. That's really long, but basically, if you know something, if you are convicted of something, you move out of faith, right? You no longer need faith. So how can we be so hard on other people who are living by faith, right? Just something to think about, okay? Okay, just a couple of quotes. Doubt isn't the opposite of faith. It's an element of faith. And again, to know something means that you no longer need faith. So if you know something, if you're 100% convinced of it, if it's knowledge, you no longer need faith. So where does that leave you in your quest? Okay, I have just a couple minutes, right, Kelly? I've got just a minute. I just want to show you this just really quick. So, I'm a very visual person, and so those of you guys over here, sorry, I'll try and. So I want you to think of the stages as boxes, okay? So we're just gonna we're gonna pare it all down into just 4 boxes, okay? So this is our simplicity box. This is when we're young. Everything is very nice, it's very linear, it fits, it's straightforward, and it's lovely, right? We love being in this box. And then we have life experiences where we can no longer be in this box. And so we go from simplicity into the next box. Okay, now I want you to notice this. This box, developmentally, if we're doing it developmentally, has to go inside this one. Okay, you take the boxes with you. Now we're in complexity. Complexity is where we continue to expand. We continue to ask questions. And again, as we continue to go through this, it gets uncomfortable. We outgrow it a lot of the time. And we move into the next box. Oh my goodness, we have one. Thank you. Which is perplexity. So we went simplicity, complexity, perplexity. Perplexity is where nothing makes sense. I'm questioning everything. I don't even know if there's a God. Okay. And again, this does not have to be the same. This doesn't look the same for everybody, right? This is just an example. Okay. After perplexity, we go into another box that's actually a really simple box again, and we can call it simplicity, but we call it harmony. And again, they all sit inside each other, okay? But here's the thing. God is bigger than all of the boxes. God doesn't need a box, right? This is just our developmental journey. So if you look at it like the rings on a tree, developmentally, we need each step. And so if I'm looking at a tree grow, I'm not going to be freaked out when it's at one of its rings. I'm going to be like, oh yeah, that's the next step. That's how you get bigger. That's how you grow, right? We're going to fly through some of these. So just a quick thought. When people are going through this, understand there's loss involved, loss and grief, okay? Which means the people that are going through this faith journey often feel very alone. They've loss of community, loss of hope, loss of grounding practices, sometimes loss of everything they've ever known, okay? So the other side of that is family members who are watching them can go through their own grief process, okay? So again, just an understanding, you guys are gonna hate me. I'm gonna like fly through. I'm happy to send you guys a bunch of this stuff. A lot of this is more for the therapist side. So I just want to close with this last thought. We live in an addicted world, an unstable climate, natural disasters, wars, financial ruin, terrorism. Sounds amazing, right? Families pitted against families, gang shooting at gangs, collateral damage in every direction. Unspeakable horrors happening within the walls of homes where there should be only safety. Despair and discouragement are rampant. We've all faced circumstances that make us fearful and frustrated about the future. It's understandable to be worried, right? But God isn't worried. He's not running around trying to figure out, he's not running around heaven trying to figure out a plan to save us. He's got us covered. Always has. Thank you guys so much for your time. We are out of time, but I'm happy to stay for any questions that anybody has. So thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.